November had come the way it always did, not with a single decisive cold front, but with a slow, creeping resignation. The fields had surrendered their final yield weeks ago. The apple trees stood bare and grey, their skeletal branches reaching upward like the hands of old men asking a question the sky refused to answer. The land exhaled, a long, low breath carrying the smell of wet soil, decaying leaves, and the faint sweetness of rot where the windfall apples had not been gathered in time. Edwin moved through this landscape the way a man moves through a familiar dream, aware of every detail, yet distant from it. He was 31 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested a man who had lived a considerably longer life in emotional terms. His hands were rough and large, the hands of a farmer who had worked the same patch of land since boyhood. There was a deliberate quietness about him, not the quietness of a man with nothing to say, but of one who had learned through long solitude to keep his thoughts company with very little noise. His home sat at the outermost edge of the village settlement, a low, solid structure of grey-brown stone with a clay-tiled roof and a chimney at one end. The house had been warmed once by a family, his wife Maran with her laugh that carried across the yard, their daughter, barely 2 at the time of the plague, his younger brother Pell, who was better with animals than anyone Edwin had ever known. The plague had moved through the settlement like fire through dry grass, and when it was finished, it had stripped Edwin's world down to a single person, himself. The house still held the shapes of the people who had inhabited it, the low chair by the fire, the carved toy near the hearth, the pair of worn boots belonging to Pell that he had never been able to discard. For 5 years, he had kept the farm running through sheer routine, because the land demanded attention regardless of grief. But now it was November. The work was done, and there was nothing left between him and the silence. He stood on the stone steps that evening and watched dark clouds consolidate into a single mass rolling in from the northwest. The first drops of rain hit around him, scattered then gathering pace. A strange premonition had been sitting at the edge of his awareness for weeks, formless and unnameable. He wiped the rain from his forehead and stepped inside. The storm that arrived that night was not ordinary autumn rain. The wind drove through every crack in the stone walls. The rain hit the windows in volleys, sheets flung against the glass with such force that the panes shuddered. Outside, one of the larger trees fell through the darkness with a sound like the world splitting along an old seam. Edwin had eaten a simple supper and made his way to bed. He was nearly asleep when the knock came. Sharp, sudden, 3 decisive blows against the front door. He was upright before the third had finished, found the rifle in the dark, and moved to the window. In the flicker of lightning, a figure on the threshold, unmistakably slight, unmistakably drenched. "Who are you?" he called. "What do you want?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you." A woman's voice, deeper than he might have expected. "I thought the house might be empty. Please, let me in. There's nowhere else for me to go tonight. I won't survive it out here." Something quieter and older than strategy said, "There is a person standing in the cold and the rain. You know what it means to be left out in the cold." He set the rifle against the wall and opened the door. She was an orc. The green of her skin was unmistakable even in the poor light, a deep, dusky olive, the color of a forest in shadow. Her features were strong and angular, her eyes a dark amber, almost gold, and very clear. She was shaking, not from fear, but from cold. The old reflexes stirred for a fraction of a second, years of village talk, years of official decrees, but she was looking at him with those amber eyes, steady and exhausted, and the cold coming off her was real, and she was a person who would not last the night without warmth. "Please," she said quietly, "I won't cause you any trouble. I just need to get warm." "Come in," Edwin said. She had said almost nothing after stepping inside. Edwin brought her the thick wool blanket from the cedar chest, and she took it with undisguised gratitude, wrapped herself in it, and settled into the chair beside the fire. He put fresh wood on and returned to bed. Sleep came eventually. He woke to the quality of light that belongs to a morning after a great storm, everything washed and still. The chair was empty. The blanket had been folded neatly and placed on the seat. Edwin stood holding it and felt something he could not immediately name. A small, hollow displacement, like arriving at a meeting place and finding the other person already gone. Then he heard it. The solid, rhythmic sound of an axe striking wood. Clean strikes, the kind that split a log in 1 or 2 blows. He stepped out into the cold, bright morning. She was at the chopping block behind the house, working through a stack of logs with an economy of motion that bespoke long practice. She looked up when she heard him. "My name is Skella," she said, setting the axe in the block. "Figured the least I could do was make myself useful while you slept." Edwin looked at the considerable pile of split wood and felt the tight, contracted thing in his chest shift very slightly, like ice beginning, almost imperceptibly, to move. "I'm Edwin, and I appreciate it." He paused. The yard smelled of fresh-cut wood. "Are you hungry?" "I have bread and eggs." Skella pushed a loose strand of dark hair back from her face. "Let me cook," she said. "It seems fair." Inside, Edwin coaxed the coals back to life while Skella moved around his kitchen with a practical confidence that this morning he did not mind at all. She found the pan, cracked the eggs with a sure hand, cut 2 even slices of bread. While she worked, she talked, steadily and without evasion, as though she had decided to give the full account without drama. Her village was gone. A militia, not even soldiers, she said, with something more sad than bitter, had come at night with torches and old grievances and the official license the anti-orc decrees provided. The community had scattered. Some had fled south. Some had not made it. 6 months of moving through forests, sleeping where she could, eating what she could find. "I wasn't going to bother you," she said. "I saw the house from the road and thought maybe I could sleep in the barn. Then the storm came in faster than I expected." A pause. "I'm glad you opened the door." "So am I," Edwin said, and surprised himself with how completely he meant it. They ate. Outside, starlings argued in the bare branches of the apple tree. When Edwin stood to carry his plate to the wash basin, Skella made a short, sudden sound, a suppressed laugh. He looked at her. She was looking at the significant tear in the knee of his trousers. "How long has that been there?" she asked. "Longer than it should have been," he admitted. "Sit down," she said. "Do you have thread and a needle?" He found them in the tin on the shelf. Maren had kept them there, and he had never moved them, and sat at the table while Skella took up the needle and began. Her fingers were deft, the stitching even and close. "Why do you live alone?" she asked, not looking up. "The plague," he said. 5 years ago, my wife. My daughter. She wasn't even 2. My brother." He said it plainly because there was no way to ornament it. "I was the only one who didn't get sick." Skella's hands did not stop moving. She did not offer the usual reflexive sympathies. She simply continued stitching and then said, "I'm sorry. Truly." A small pause. "The people we lose don't stop existing in us. They change shape, but they stay." She tied off the thread and stood to put her coat on. Edwin realized she was preparing to leave. "Wait," he said. "I have more work than I can do alone. The winter is long. I could use another pair of hands." Skella regarded him carefully. "You understand what it means if someone finds out? The laws are not kind to people who shelter orcs. You would be putting yourself in danger." "My house is a long way from the village," Edwin said. "No one comes out here." She looked around the kitchen, at the fire, at the mended trousers, at the tin on the shelf, and something in her expression settled. "All right," she said. For a while, what followed was, by any external measure, a very quiet life. But there is a particular kind of quiet that is not empty, that is, in fact, fuller than most noise. And this was what gradually filled Edwin's stone house in the weeks and months that followed. They established a rhythm almost without discussing it. Mornings were for work, Edwin for the outdoor tasks, Skella for the firewood and the kitchen and the winter stores, which he approached with the thoroughness of someone who understands what it means to go hungry. She was useful in ways he had not anticipated. She knew plants well, could read weather better than most almanacs, possessed knowledge drawn from a life largely outdoors that regularly surprised him. Evenings were for the fire, and for tea, and for talking. They talked the way people do when there are no expectations attached, freely about everything and nothing. She told him about her people. He told her about the village and found that her perspective was frequently more clear-eyed than his own. They argued about small things with the comfortable stubbornness of people who have lost the formality that requires one to defer to the other. It was December when Edwin noticed the habit had formed without his choosing it. Every morning since she had arrived, Skella rose before him. By the time he came through from the bedroom, the water was already heating over the rebuilt fire. A small clay pot positioned precisely on the trivet closest to the flame. She never said anything about it. He never mentioned it. He simply came in from the cold and found warm water waiting and poured it into his cup. And the morning began. Then one morning in the deep of December, he woke inexplicably early. Grey-dark outside, the frost thick on the inside of the window panes. He got up, moved quietly through the cold house, crouched at the hearth and rebuilt the fire from the overnight coals and set the pot to heat. He stood there waiting, watching the first faint curl of steam begin to rise. He heard her wake. The small sounds from the other room, the creak of the cot, feet finding the floor, the familiar, unhurried sequence. Then she appeared in the doorway, saw him standing at the fire, and stopped. He turned to look at her. She looked at him. At the pot on the trivet, the steam beginning to gather. She took in the situation in one glance, and something passed across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else. And she came in and sat in her chair and picked up the mending she had left on the arm of it the night before. He poured water into both cups and brought hers over. He sat down with his own. Neither of them said a word about it. The fire popped and settled. Outside, the frost did its slow, silent work on the yard. It was only later that morning, walking out to see to the animals, that Edwin realized he could not remember the last time he had made himself tea alone. The laughter came in January, over a language lesson that had not been intended as one. It had begun simply enough. Skella correcting the way Edwin said the orc word for cold, which he had been mispronouncing for several weeks. He attempted it again. She shook her head and said it properly. Slower. He tried once more, with concentration. She went very still. What? He said. She pressed her lips together. Her shoulders were doing something that suggested considerable internal effort. What did I say? You said, she began, and then had to stop. You said something that is not exactly the word for cold. What did I say? She told him. He stared at her. Those are not even similar sounds. They are in your mouth, she said, and the suppressed laugh finally escaped. And then there was no more suppressing it. It came out fully, completely. The real kind, the kind that takes over the whole face and involves the eyes and requires both hands pressed flat to the table to stay upright. Edwin looked at her, laughing, and tried to maintain any dignity whatsoever and failed. And then he was laughing too, and it was the kind of laughter that feeds on itself, where every time one of them nearly stops, the other one's face sets them off again. I've been saying this, Edwin said, every morning, out loud, to you. Every morning, she confirmed, wiping her eyes, and you said nothing. I was going to correct you eventually. It went on for some time. The fire burned and the frost was at the windows, and neither of them could have said exactly when the laughing stopped, because it didn't stop cleanly. It trailed off into the kind of breathless quiet that comes after, where everything in the room looks slightly more vivid, more precisely itself. Skella wiped her eyes a final time. Edwin looked at the ceiling. You will never tell anyone, he said. I will tell everyone, she said. He looked at her. She'd looked at him. The fire made its small domestic sounds. He knew in that moment that this was something he would carry. Not the embarrassment, the other thing, the specific quality of her laugh, full and unguarded and entirely real. He would carry that. He already knew it. There was an evening in late January when the thing almost got said. They had been at the fire for perhaps 2 hours, long enough that the conversation had gradually lapsed into the comfortable shared silence of people who no longer need to fill space with words. Edwin was looking into the fire. Skella had a piece of needlework in her lap that she had largely stopped attending to. He had been turning a sentence over in his mind for a while. A simple sentence. 6 words at most. He had a clear sense of how it would sound in the room and of what would happen in the few seconds after it. He looked up from the fire. She was already looking at him, not the way a person looks when they have happened to glance in the same direction at the same moment. The way a person looks when they have been watching for a while and have decided not to look away. Her needlework sat motionless in her lap. The sentence was right there. He looked back at the fire. He heard her exhale, very quietly, barely a breath, and then the soft sound of the needlework being picked back up. He stared at the flames and felt the particular weight of a word that has been chosen not to be spoken, which is different from a word that was simply never there. After a while, she said, "The wind is picking up again." "Yes," he said. They sat there until the fire burned low, and neither of them said anything else that evening that had not been said 100 times before. But the room was different after that, and they both knew it, and neither of them acknowledged that either. He said nothing about any of this. He was a careful man, and whatever was between them had been defined from the beginning as a practical arrangement, and he was not willing to endanger it by placing any weight on it that it had not offered to bear. But the feeling was there, quiet and persistent, a small, steady warmth underneath everything else. By February, it had a name, though he kept that name entirely to himself. There was one evening when she reached across the table for the candle, and her hand came down on his wrist instead of the candlestick. A moment passed. Neither of them moved. She could feel his pulse under her fingers, slow and steady. Then she found the candle, adjusted its angle, and went back to her stitching without a word. Edwin looked at the page of figures in front of him and did not see any of them for a long time. Spring came with its upheaval of green. They worked the plantings side by side in the long rows, and the world bloomed around them. One morning in the first warm week of May, Edwin stood in the yard watching the blossoms fall and made a decision. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He took her south through the older, calmer forest, the one his father had called the Green Cathedral for the height of its trees and the slow columns of light through their upper branches. They walked for about an hour until the trees began to thin, the light brightened, and the sound changed. That particular sound of water and open air that means you're approaching something. The lake was small and surrounded on three sides by old cherry trees and wild apple, all in full, extraordinary bloom. The cherry blossoms were white and abundant, settled in drifts on the surface of the water, which was impossibly clear, every pebble visible on the bottom, small silver fish moving between the floating blossom islands with their unhurried purpose. The color of the water was that blue-green of a deep, spring-fed lake that seems to contain light rather than simply reflect it. Skella stopped at the edge of the trees and looked at it and said nothing for a long moment. "I found this place when I was a boy," Edwin said eventually. "I used to come here when things were difficult. It always made them seem less permanent." "It makes sense," she said softly. The blossom drifted. A fish turned in the clear water. Edwin looked at her directly. "Skella, will you stay with me? Not just for the season. Share this life with me. All of it. Whatever it becomes." She turned to look at him. The morning light was on her face and there was something in her amber eyes, an honest, unguarded looking, that he felt all the way down. "Yes," she said. It was not a small word, the way she said it. It was exact and complete and held no conditions. The revelation came on a quiet afternoon in the third week of May. It had begun some weeks before as a faint, intermittent awareness, movement beneath her ribs, attributed to ordinary things. But the movements had continued and become, gradually, undeniably specific. The kind of specific that the body reserves for one particular circumstance and no other. Skella set down her mending. She placed one hand gently against her abdomen and sat with this knowledge for a long, private moment. Then she went to find Edwin. He was at the workbench under the back overhang, sharpening a blade with long, focused strokes. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Edwin," she said, and paused because the words were large and she wanted to handle them carefully. "Our house is going to become louder," she said. "In about 5 months, maybe 6. He put down the sharpening stone. He looked at her face, at the hand she still held against her front, at the clear way she was watching him. And then something happened to his face that she had never seen happen to a face before. All the restraint, all the careful composure, all the years of learned quietness simply dissolved, and what was underneath it was pure and radiant and overwhelming. The face of a man who had lost everything and was being given something back. He crossed the yard in 3 strides and took her in his arms and held her. She could feel from the quality of the silence that he was crying, though she could not see his face. "I didn't know," he said against her hair after a while. "I didn't know it was possible to feel like this again." She held him and said nothing and understood completely. It was a morning in early June when the familiar dappled gray horse appeared on the road. Edwin raised his arm. The man on the horse was Brennan, Edwin's oldest friend in the village, a miller's son who had grown up 3 houses down from the family farm. They had drifted. Edwin's isolation had seen to that. But the warmth of long friendship is durable in a way that distance cannot fully erode. Brennan dismounted, and they met in the yard with the half-awkward, half-easy physicality of men greeting friends they haven't seen in too long. "You look completely different," Brennan said. "Like yourself, but younger." Edwin laughed. "Something happened to me that I can't account for," he said, "and that I am grateful for every single morning." Brennan had brought a stone jar of apple preserves, his wife's, from last autumn's harvest, offered with the slightly self-conscious generosity of a man who knows he should have visited sooner. "Come inside," Edwin said. The house was warm and fragrant. Skella had been baking since before breakfast, and the smell of the tart cooling on the shelf was the kind of smell that makes a room feel like a destination. Brennan stepped into the kitchen and stopped. Skella was standing at the table, arranging cups. Her condition was, by this point in summer, entirely visible. She looked up and regarded Brennan with a calm, direct assessment of someone who is used to being looked at and has long since made peace with it. A series of adjustments passed quickly across his face. Surprise, confusion, and then a genuine, if somewhat dazed, acceptance. "This is Skella," Edwin said. His voice was easy and certain. "She is my life." Brennan absorbed this. Then he held out the jar of apple preserves towards Skella and said, a little gruffly, "My wife made these. They're very good with tart." Skella accepted the jar, and that was that. They spent what remained of the afternoon at the wooden table, the 3 of them, the fire warm at their backs. Brennan left in the early evening, shook Edwin's hand at the gate, turned once on the road to raise a hand, and rode south toward the village. Edwin went inside. Skella was washing the cups. The fire burned low and orange. Everything was quiet. He did not see the calculation behind his old friend's eyes as the horse carried him home. He did not know what Brennan would say or to whom when he arrived back in the village with this extraordinary piece of news. He did not know that by the following morning it would be in the wrong ears. He woke to voices. His dreaming mind tried several times to incorporate them into something harmless before waking finally overrode it. Then he heard what was under the voices, the soft orange flicker at the extreme periphery of the bedroom window, and he was out of bed before he had decided to move. What he saw through the glass turned his blood cold and thin. They were coming across the upper field, 30, perhaps more, with torches throwing wild light across their faces and farming tools repurposed into weapons. Long-handled axes, work blades, brush-clearing poles tipped with iron. Several men at the front carried hunting spears. They moved with the loose, volatile coordination of a mob that has given itself permission. Edwin pressed his forehead to the cold glass for 1 second. Brennan, his old friend who had sat at his table and eaten tart and ridden away in golden evening light, and had then, at some point on the road home, decided that what he had seen needed to be corrected. He turned from the window. Skella was already awake, sitting upright in the bed, hand pressed to her front, looking at him across the darkness of the room. She had not made a sound. Her face, in the faint orange light coming through the curtains, was the face of someone who had always known this night would come eventually. Not surprise, not panic. Something closer to the terrible peace of recognition. He crossed the room to her quickly and crouched at the side of the bed and held her face between his hands and looked at her directly. Her amber eyes were very steady. "You need to go," he said. "Right now, through the back. Take nothing. There's no time. Get to the tree line at the south end of the lower yard and stay hidden in the dark. Don't move toward the road. The forest is the only safe direction. Edwin, I'm going to go out the front and give you time." His voice was quiet and entirely certain, the voice of a man who has already done the calculation and reached the only available conclusion. "They're here for both of us. If I keep them at the front, you have a chance through the back, but you have to go now." She looked at him. In the silence between them, a log shifted in the hearth and sent a brief shower of sparks up the chimney. "I'll find you," he said. "However long it takes, wherever you go, I will find you, but you have to move." She put her hand over one of his, pressing it hard against her face for a single, fierce moment. Then she was up, pulling her coat from the hook beside the door, stepping into her boots with a speed that was almost brutal in its efficiency. He watched her dress with the particular attention of a person trying to hold a moment that is already leaving. "The gap in the south fence," she said quietly, pulling the coat closed. "I know it." "Good. Go. Edwin." She stopped in the doorway to the back of the house. The torchlight was stronger through the windows now, and the voices louder, a formless bellowing that pressed at the walls of the house from all sides. "Promise me," he looked at her. "Promise me you'll find me." "I swear it," he said. She looked at him for one more second. Then she went. He heard the back door open and close. Quick, controlled, barely a sound. And then there was only the noise of the mob outside and the settling fire and the particular silence that follows when someone has left a room for the last time. He found the rifle. He checked it, loaded as it always was at night. He walked to the front door and opened it and stepped out onto the stone step. The mob had reached the yard fence. He could see individual faces in the torchlight. Men who had bought eggs from him at market, men he had greeted on the road in the early mornings, men whose children had sometimes chased his chickens. Their faces had been rearranged by something darker and older than any of those ordinary interactions. "This is my land," he said. His voice carried across the yard with a steadiness that surprised him. "You're trespassing on it. Turn around and go home." "Edwin!" The man who shouted was someone he vaguely knew, a wheelwright from the edge of the settlement. "We know what you've been hiding in there. Come out and let us deal with this properly, and we'll go easy on you. You've been bewitched. No one blames a bewitched man." "No one is hiding anything," Edwin said. "Go home." "We've come to protect you," someone else shouted, and the crowd murmured in agreement. "From a devil in your own house, from an orc witch who is carrying—" He fired into the air. The crack of the rifle split the night clean, and the nearest men stumbled backward, and for a moment there was absolute silence, broken only by the hiss and pop of the torches. "The next one," Edwin said, "will not go into the air. Go. Home." But every second he held them at the fence was a second of distance for Skella in the dark of the southern forest. The wheelwright said something to the man beside him, and then they came over the fence. Edwin fired once more, the last warning shot he could afford. And then they were on him, and there was no more time for strategy. He used the rifle as a bar, connecting with the first man to reach him and sending him back into the man behind. Someone grabbed his coat. He turned into the grip and brought his elbow up hard. Another man came from his left side, and he took the blow across the ribs, a long-handled tool, and the pain was immediate and enormous, and he went down onto one knee on the stone step and felt the world tilt sideways. He came back up. He did not know exactly how. He came back up and kept fighting because there was nothing else available to him and because every second mattered. Inside the house, Skella had gone through the back door and moved quickly across the lower yard in the darkness, keeping close to the wall of the barn. She reached the south fence and found the gap she had known about since October. 2 stones fallen away at the base, wide enough to slip through if you turned sideways. She went through it and into the long grass on the other side and stopped. She could hear everything, the shouting, the sounds of impact. Edwin's voice still carrying over the crowd, and then not carrying. She turned around. The yard was visible from where she stood, the torchlight, the shapes of men in motion. She could see Edwin, still on his feet, the shape of him clear for a moment in the wild orange light. And then a man came from his side, and he went down again, and this time, getting back up was slower. She watched his face from across the dark of the lower yard. She could see it in the torchlight, bloodied, set, refusing. He was looking toward the south fence as though he knew she had stopped, as though he knew she had turned around. His mouth moved. She could not hear the words over the noise of the crowd, but she could read them. The shape of them was unmistakable. Was the shape of the words she'd been dreading and expecting simultaneously since the moment she heard the mob cross the upper field. Run. She shook her head, once, as if he could see it. The crowd was pressing in on him. 2 men had his arms now. A third was coming from behind, his face in the torchlight, his eyes finding the dark where she stood, unerringly, the way they had always moved toward her across any room. Please, save yourself. Save our child. She pressed her hand flat against her front, where the child moved, still steady, alive, and felt the specific, terrible clarity of a decision that is not really a decision because there is only one thing that the person who loves you has asked you to do. She turned. She ran. The forest closed around her, and the light fell away, and she ran, stumbling in the dark between the trees, one hand out ahead of her and one hand against her front, and the last image she carried, the last thing she had seen when she looked back, was Edwin in the torchlight, still standing, looking south. She was in the forest when dawn came. Pale grey light filtering through the canopy onto wet leaves and moss, a forest morning continuing without any reference to human catastrophe. Skella leaned against a broad oak trunk and pressed her hand against her front, and felt the small, persistent movement there, still steady, and allowed herself one moment of complete dissolution before pulling herself back together by sheer force of will. She moved through the forest for 3 days. She ate late blackberries, mushrooms she was certain of, watercress from the stream she followed through the second day. She slept in careful intervals, never completely, one part of her always alert, the way a hunted animal sleeps. The thoughts came in waves. Edwin on the ground in the yard, bleeding, held down. The child, thought of now with a fierce, absolute protectiveness that was now the most complete and certain thing she knew. She thought about whether any of it had been something other than a slow catastrophe building toward this night. Then she thought about the kitchen and the morning light and the way he had looked at her across the breakfast table with no calculation in his eyes whatsoever. No. Whatever the cost, it had not been a mistake. On the 4th day, she smelled wood smoke of the particular layered kind that means community. What she found in a shallow hollow between 2 hills, concealed beneath old-growth conifers so dense it would be invisible from any road, was a small orc settlement. 15, perhaps 20 souls. hidden deep, moving quietly, living in the watchful manner of a people who had long since learned to make as little impact on the visible world as possible. They took her in without question. Among displaced people, a woman alone and pregnant on the road requires no further credential. She had been in the settlement for perhaps 2 weeks when the news came. It arrived with a man called Dren, an orc who passed through occasionally, trading what he could and carrying what news moved between the scattered communities of the Hidden. He was a spare, watchful man, not given to embellishment, and this was the quality that made what he said impossible to dismiss. He had been near that village. He had seen what there was to see from the safety of the tree line. They had found no woman, but the man who had sheltered the orc, the farmer on the edge of the settlement, had been dealt with by the village's own order. Dren did not look at Skella directly when he said it, which was the only concession he made to the fact that she had gone completely still on the other side of the fire. Hara sat with her that night, said nothing, as was her way. The fire burned low, and no one rebuilt it. Skella sat in the cold and the dark and understood that Edwin was dead. She had run because he had asked her to. She had run and he had stayed, and there was no version of what Dren had described that ended any other way. A man who fought a mob of 30 alone with a broken rib and blood in his eye, to give the woman he loved time to reach the forest. She knew what that cost. In the morning, she pressed her hand against her front and felt the child move and said quietly, "I will tell him who you were. I will not let him forget you." She lived through the month that followed with a determined, quiet endurance. The settlement was small and careful. There was a woman called Hara, old enough to have seen several of these cycles of persecution, who had developed from a lifetime of survival a quality of steadiness more valuable than comfort. She was the one who sat with Skella through the worst nights and said nothing, which was exactly what was needed. The settlement moved twice before winter was over, packing what could be packed and resettling in new hollows. 2 months after her arrival, in the deep cold of early winter, she gave birth to her son. He was born in the early morning hours with minimum drama and maximum effort, attended by Hera and a younger woman who had experience with births. He was, when first placed in her arms, a surprising weight for something that had been a secret and a hope for so long. Solid, warm, and emphatically present. His skin was that warm brownish olive of the mixed child. His eyes, when they first opened, were a dark amber brown. She looked at those eyes and pressed her lips together very hard. He had Edwin's eyes. Not the color, but the quality of them, that particular steadiness, that looking at things directly that was so characteristic of his father. She felt it like a blow and a gift simultaneously. She named him Ellis. Ellis grew the way healthy children do, with alarming speed and energetic disregard for adult convenience. He learned to walk, then to talk, drawing vocabulary from whichever adult had claimed his attention that week. He had his father's hands, broad across the palm, strong, and his mother's stubbornness, which was considerable. He was perhaps 8 months old, pulling himself upright against Skella's knee when he first said it. "Da," he said. Then again, with the focused repetition of a child testing a new sound. "Da, da." Skella looked at him. He looked back at her with those dark amber brown eyes, very pleased with himself. She sat with her hands in her lap and did not speak for a long moment. There was nothing to correct. He was simply practicing vowels, as babies do. He did not know what the word meant. He did not know that there was a man it could have belonged to, a man who had crossed a yard in 3 strides and held her when she told him and said, "I didn't know it was possible to feel like this again." "Da," Ellis said again, reaching up to pat her face with one small hand. She took the hand and held it carefully against her cheek. "Yes," she said quietly, to herself as much as to him. "Yes, that's right." He was 2.5, old enough for questions, young enough to ask them with complete guilelessness, when he saw Marette's father come to collect her at the end of a day's play. Marette was 3, and her father scooped her up without ceremony and set her on his shoulders, and Marette laughed the way children laugh when they are very certain of the ground they stand on. Ellis watched this until they had gone around the corner and out of sight, and then he turned to Skella with the expression of a child assembling a question from available components. "Where is my father?" he asked. Skella sat down on the low log beside the fire ring and looked at him at eye level. "Your father was a farmer," she said. "His name was Edwin. He had a stone house with a chimney at the edge of a field, and the most extraordinary apple trees you have ever seen." She paused. "He was very kind, the kindest person I have ever known, and very brave. Not loud brave, but the quiet kind that costs more. He loved you before you were born. He knew you were coming, and he was so happy." She looked at her son steadily. "He isn't here because bad things happened, because the world was unkind to us, the way it sometimes is. But he was real, and he was good, and you are made of him." Ellis looked at her for a long moment with those eyes that were so precisely his father's in their quality of attention. "Was he big?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Did he have a horse?" "Not his own, but he borrowed one sometimes." Ellis nodded, then climbed into her lap with the compact efficiency of a person who knows exactly where they are comfortable. She put her arms around him, and they sat there by the cold fire ring while the settlement went on around them. She did not cry until after he was asleep. From his earliest understanding, he knew about his father. Skella told him in pieces. She told him about the lake, the cherry trees in bloom and the clear water and the silver fish, and about the question Edwin had asked her there and the word she had answered with. She told him that place was the place where his parents had promised each other something true. Ellis listened with an attention remarkable for his age and would ask questions about specific details. What color was the door? Did the farm have a river? She answered everything she could, and where she didn't know, she said so honestly. He was 4 years old when the cherry trees bloomed again. May came with a full, unrestrained assertion of a season that knows its rights. The wild cherry trees in the hills above the settlement broke open in a single warm week, and something moved in Skella that had been waiting to move for a long time. She knew where the lake was. She had held its coordinates in memory with the exactness of something precious. The direction, the landmarks, the way the sound changed as the forest thinned and open water drew near. She had held it carefully, not allowing herself to look at it directly, the way you hold an ember in cupped hands. "There is a place I need to take you," she told Ellis one morning when the blossoms were at their fullest. He looked up from a private construction project involving sticks and stones. "Where?" "A lake, south of here. It's important." He considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old weighing a proposition. "Are there fish?" "Yes, small ones. Silver and clear water." Ellis stood and brushed his knees. "All right." Hara packed them a traveling bundle without being asked. Dried food, a blanket, a small clay pot, and saw them off at the edge of the settlement with the expression of an old woman who can tell the difference between a foolish journey and a necessary one. They walked south for 5 days. It was a different journey from the desperate, solitary flight through these same forests 4 years before. This time, there was a child's hand in hers, and a child's voice asking questions, and the particular rhythm of traveling with a 4-year-old, which requires patience, accepts delays, and produces in compensation a quality of attention to small details that an adult moving alone would never access. Ellis walked well and complained little, and on the 3rd evening, when his legs gave out, he sat down in the path and looked up at her with complete trust, waiting to be carried. She hoisted him onto her back and felt his small arms around her neck and walked until dark. On the 5th day, the forest thinned in the way she remembered, the light brightened, and she heard, before she saw anything, the sound of water and open air. Her chest tightened in the way that happens when you approach something that holds more of you than you remember leaving there. The trees opened, and there was the lake, exactly as she had held it in memory. The cherry trees in full luminous bloom, blossoms drifting on the surface in slow circles, the water that impossible clear blue-green, small silver fish visible in the depths, the pebbled bottom perfect in the morning light. Skella stood at the edge of the trees and looked at it. The tears came without decision, 4 years' worth, and she let them come. Ellis looked at the lake, then at her face, then at the lake again. He put his hand in hers without speaking, and she gripped it. "This is the place," she said, when she could. "It's beautiful," Ellis said. He went to the water's edge and began investigating the margins with the thorough methodology of a child who views any body of water as incomplete until he has established its exact character. She watched him and breathed and let the memories come. She had been standing like this for perhaps a quarter hour when she became aware of movement on the far side of the lake, a shape between the trees. A man, moving along the far bank with the unhurried purpose of someone who knows this place, knows where to walk, where the ground holds firm, where the bank narrows and you have to step up onto the root of the old cherry tree that grows at the water's edge. A rifle slung over one shoulder, its barrel catching the morning light. Every instinct she had spent 4 years refining said, "Take Ellis and move back into the trees, quietly and immediately." A man with a rifle at an isolated lake. It meant hunter, it meant danger, it meant the careful small withdrawal that had kept them alive. "Ellis," she said, keeping her voice careful. "Come here." He came. She put her hand on his shoulder and moved them both a step back, into the first layer of shadow under the cherry branches. The man on the far side had stopped walking. He was looking across the water. She could not see his face at this distance. The blossoms were too thick between them, white curtains drifting across the surface. But she could see the arrested quality of how he stood. He had noticed them. She should move further back. She knew this. She had learned this lesson thoroughly and at great cost. A woman with a child, visible to a stranger with a weapon, in a world that hunted her kind, the correct response was to go, immediately, without waiting to see. She did not go. Something had happened in her chest. Not a thought. Something before thought, beneath it, in the place where the body holds the things it knows without being told. It was impossible. Dren had told her. The village had done what the village did to men who sheltered orcs. She had sat in the cold with Hara on that long night and understood, with complete and final clarity, that Edwin was dead. She had told her son he was dead. She had mourned him, not the way you mourn something that might come back, but the way you mourn a stone you have dropped into deep water, which is to say completely and without reservation. And so, what she was feeling was simply recognition of a shape, a coincidence of posture, of proportion, the body's tendency to find the lost face in every stranger's. It was the cruelty of grief. Not over, apparently, even now. She was about to turn away, to take Ellis and continue south along the bank and leave this stranger to his hunting. Then he moved his head. Just slightly, a tilt of it, looking at something carefully, from a particular angle that was so specific, so entirely his and no one else's, that the air went out of her body as completely as if she had walked into a wall. "Edwin," she said. It came out barely above a whisper. She had not decided to say it. It came out the way breath comes out, involuntary, necessary. The man on the far side of the lake went absolutely rigid. He had been standing at the water's edge for a moment, watching the shape of a woman and a small child at the far bank, with the reflexive alertness of someone who had learned to assess every stranger quickly. He had been about to move, to give them distance, to not alarm them, when they had stepped back into the tree shadow, and he had lost them against the darkness of the undergrowth. And then a voice had come across the water, a single word, his name. He stood completely still. It was not possible. He had learned, after the first year, to stop hearing her name in things, the wind in the upper branches. A woman's voice at a distance in a market town, the sound the water made against certain rocks. He had learned to recognize these as what they were, the mind's stubborn refusal to fully accept what the body had already concluded, and to let them pass without acting on them. But this was not the wind. This was not his mind assembling fragments into a shape it wanted to find. He said her name back across the water, and his voice was the voice of a man asking a question he has carried for 4 years and is suddenly, terrifyingly close to having answered. She was already moving before she had fully decided to move, around the edge of the lake, Ellis running beside her without knowing why, but matching her pace with the faithful urgency of a child who trusts that the running has a reason. On the other side of the lake, the man came down to the water's edge, and they reached each other there at the margin of the clear water, under the white fall of the cherry blossoms. They stopped. They were perhaps 2 feet apart, and neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke. He was older. She had known he would be, had imagined it in the hours of morning, constructing this face from the one she had memorized and extrapolating forward. But the imagination is an imperfect instrument, and the reality was different in ways that hit her all at once. The gray through his hair was more extensive than she had pictured, and the scar on his face was longer, running from above his left ear all the way to the hinge of his jaw, white and healed smooth, the kind of scar that is a full account of something she had not been there to witness. He was thinner. The lines around his eyes had deepened. He looked like a man who had spent 4 years outside in all weathers looking for something. He was alive. He was standing 2 feet away from her, and he was alive and looking at her with an expression so unguarded, so stripped of every layer of composure and reserve, that she had to press her lips together very hard and breathe through her nose, because otherwise she was going to come apart entirely, and she needed one more moment. She reached out and put her palm flat against his chest. She felt his heart beat, slow and steady, the way it had always been, the way she had felt it on the night he held her and cried and said, "I didn't know it was possible to feel like this again." She felt it and confirmed it, and then she put her arms around him, and he put his around her, and they stood like that without speaking, and the tears came, and the cherry blossoms came down around them, and the lake was very quiet. I thought, he started against her hair. I know, she said. Every spring, he said. Every summer, I came back here, every year. His voice was uneven. She had never heard it uneven before, not in the yard that terrible night, not when he had fought with a broken rib and kept fighting. It undid her completely. His arms tightened. I promised you I'd find you. She pulled back enough to look at him properly, to see the scar and the gray and the 5 years in his face, all of it honestly, without flinching. I was told you were dead, she said. I know, he said. I was nearly. They looked at each other for a long moment in the morning light. Then, very slowly, Edwin's eyes moved to the small, solemn person standing approximately 3 feet away. Ellis had been watching everything. He had the focused, serious stillness of a child who is in the presence of something large and is trying to understand it correctly before he acts. He watched his mother and this man hold each other. He watched her cry, which he did not do often, and which therefore meant something. He watched the man's face over her shoulder. Edwin crouched slowly to eye level with the boy. The movement was careful, the movement of someone who understands that this must be done right and is going to take the time it requires. He looked at Ellis, at the broad palms, at the steady amber-brown eyes, at the particular quiet solidity that had come from both of them. He said nothing for a moment. He simply looked. This is Ellis, Skella said, and her voice was barely held together. He knows who you are. I told him everything. Edwin's throat moved. Hello, Ellis, he said. His voice was lower than speech and higher than silence. Ellis looked at him for a long time with 4 years' worth of collected question. He looked at the scar. He looked at the gray in the hair. He looked at the eyes that were the color his mother had told him once, quietly, that they were. That his were very like, in quality if not in color. He did not move. He simply looked. Later, sitting at the lake's edge with Ellis asleep in Skella's lap, Edwin told her what had happened after she ran. They had bound his hands and marched him back to the village and put him in the old stone cell below the mill. He had been there 3 days before anyone came. The wound above his eye had closed, but the rib had done something worse in transit, and he had been feverish a long time before someone thought to bring water. The scar on his face, she could trace its full history now, had been dealt during the march. At the end of his 3rd week in the cell, on a night when the young guard was drawn away, Edwin had managed what he described simply as an exit. He did not elaborate. She did not press him. After that, he had walked. He found a former traveling merchant whose sympathies ran wider than most, who gave him a horse, provisions, and no questions. Edwin had ridden east and then south, and had slowly begun the work of looking. 3 years following rumors of orc settlements through the forests of the south. Rumors that always moved because the settlements moved. He had not found her. He had gone back to the farm once, stood in the kitchen for a long time and then left. But this place, he said, looking at the lake. The afternoon light lay long and golden across the water. I kept coming back, every May and June, because this was ours. He looked at her directly. I thought if you were alive, and if you ever could, you would come back here too. I couldn't have explained why I believed that, but I did. You're not wrong, she said. They sat with that for a while, and the lake was very quiet. Take me to your settlement, he said. Please. He looked at Ellis, one small arm thrown across Skella's knee in sleep. There's nothing I need in this world that isn't here, right now. You and him." His voice was simple and completely certain. "I want to go home, and home is wherever you are." Skella looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. She looked at the scar and the grey in his hair and the 5 years of returning to this lake alone, each spring and summer carrying only hope. She thought about the night he had opened his door to a stranger in a storm, and the lake in blossom and the word yes. All of it was this man. And this man was hers, and the boy sleeping in her lap was the proof of everything that had been worth protecting. "All right," she said. It was exactly as complete and unconditional as the last time. Ellis woke a few minutes later and looked up at Edwin with 4 years' worth of collected question, and then, with the direct, unmediated trust that very young children occasionally extend before the world teaches them caution. He stepped forward and put his arms around Edwin's neck. Edwin closed his eyes and held him. Skella stood in the morning light, with blossoms falling around them all, and did not try to name what this was because it was too complete for any single word to hold. Ellis pulled back and held out his hand. Matter of fact, uncalculated, the way he held it out to his mother when they walked. Edwin took it. They walked away from the lake together, into the forest, into whatever came next. Behind them, the cherry blossoms covered the water and drifted in slow, patient circles until the light failed and the lake went dark, and then the stars came out over the water, and it was still, and it was very beautiful.